Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. Early December 1943. Cairo, Egypt. Picture the president's study, dimly lit by a solitary lamp. The air thick with the scent of ink and anticipation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's pen hovered above the paper, trembling slightly, not with indecision, but with the weight of history pressing down on him. Just moments earlier, his trusted aide, Harry Hopkins, had returned from a pivotal conversation with General George C. Marshall, the man the world assumed would orchestrate the most audacious military operation ever conceived. Yet Roosevelt's mind refused to let go of one relentless thought. I cannot sleep at night with him out of Washington. The moment of decision had arrived, and with it came a paradox that would shock the military establishment. America's fiercest battlefield general, George S. Patton, would be sidelined, while a master organizer, who had never led troops into combat, would command the invasion of Europe. Could anyone have predicted that this choice, seemingly counterintuitive, would redefine what it meant to be a great military leader? That the true measure of command might lie not in the glory of victory on the battlefield, but in the precision and vision of orchestration that could outmatch any tactical genius. This question had been simmering since May 1943, when the Tunisian campaign concluded with a staggering surrender of some 267,000 Axis soldiers in North Africa. Among the American commanders who shone brightest in that triumph was Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., a name that already sent shivers down German spines. At 57, Patton embodied the very image Americans conjured when imagining a warrior general. Imagine him standing tall in custom-made uniforms, brass buttons catching the relentless desert sun, twin ivory-handled revolvers slung at his hips, not for show, but as instruments of lethal precision. His tongue could wound like a blade, his temper could cow even the most hardened subordinates, and his tactical brilliance could decimate armies with a speed that defied conventional wisdom. But Patton's journey to this pinnacle began long before the North African desert. Born November 11, 1885, in San Gabriel, California, he was heir to a lineage steeped in military tradition. Tales of ancestors fighting in the Revolutionary and Civil Wars filled his childhood. His grandfather, a Confederate colonel, had died at the Third Battle of Winchester, a legacy of valor and sacrifice that shaped Patton's identity from his earliest days. Struggling with dyslexia, an affliction little understood at the time, young George found schoolwork grueling, yet he compensated with iron resolve and an almost obsessive drive. He spent a year at the Virginia Military Institute before entering West Point in 1904. His academic difficulties forced him to repeat his first year, but he graduated on June 11, 1909, ranking 46th out of 103 cadets, a position that belied the ferocity and ambition burning within him. Even then, his aggressive spirit and unyielding competitiveness marked him as extraordinary. After graduation, Patton's path took an unusual and fascinating turn. He competed in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics in the modern pentathlon, finishing 5th overall despite controversy surrounding his pistol shooting score, which many believed should have been higher. This brush with international competition cemented his belief in personal excellence and in the necessity for Americans to cultivate warriors capable of matching any foe in the world. Athletic skill, combined with his advantageous marriage to Beatrice Eyre, daughter of a wealthy Massachusetts industrialist, provided both the resources and social connections that would accelerate his meteoric career. Patton's baptism by fire came in 1960 amid the unforgiving deserts and rugged terrain of northern Mexico. Imagine a young lieutenant, full of restless energy, riding with Brigadier General John J. Pershing during the Pancho Villa expedition. Patton led a motorized raid against Villa's forces that ended in the deaths of 3 enemy combatants, including one of Villa's captains. In a moment that blurred brutality with audacity, Patton himself shot 2 of the men with his ivory-handled revolvers, then, in a spectacle as shocking as it was decisive, strapped their bodies to the hoods of his vehicles and drove them back to headquarters. Newspapers quickly seized on the story, hailing him as the first American officer to wield motorized vehicles in combat. But beyond the headlines, this episode cemented an enduring bond with Pershing, a mentor who would guide and protect him for decades. When America entered the First World War in 1917, Patton followed Pershing to France, stepping into the theater that would reveal his true calling, armored warfare. Tanks were crude, unwieldy machines, yet Patton saw in them a revolutionary potential. He founded the United States Tank School at Langres, France, personally drafting the doctrines and operational procedures that would shape American armored forces. He absorbed every lesson from French tactics, interrogated British tank commanders, and developed an approach that prized speed, aggression, and unrelenting initiative. By September 1918, he led the fledgling Tank Corps into the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Striding forward on foot to direct his machines under withering machine gun fire, he was wounded in action, an injury that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross and cemented his reputation for fearless leadership. In the decades that followed, Patton became the foremost advocate for mechanized warfare in the U.S. Army. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, he published articles, conducted experiments, and pressed the Army to embrace fast-moving armored units. He collaborated with Major Dwight Eisenhower, whom he had met in 1919, sharing a vision of mechanized combat that Army leadership dismissed as prohibitively expensive and dangerously radical. Budget constraints and entrenched conservatism relegated tanks to supporting infantry, but Patton's drive never faltered. He even designed the M113 cavalry saber, later known as the Patton Saber, and authored treatises on cavalry tactics, always seeking ways to preserve offensive mobility in modern warfare. By 1940, as the storm of global conflict enveloped Europe, Patton's moment had arrived. Promoted to brigadier general in October of that year, he assumed command of an armored brigade, training his troops in the aggressive tactics he had refined over decades. In the Mojave Desert, he established the Desert Training Center, a vast expanse where soldiers endured punishing drills in brutal conditions, mirroring the deserts of North Africa. His methods were exacting, his standards uncompromising, yet the men who survived emerged as some of the Army's most effective combat units. When Operation Torch commenced in November 1942, Patton commanded the Western Task Force, landing 35,000 men on the beaches of Morocco in America's first major offensive against the Axis. Despite fierce Vichy French resistance, tumultuous seas, and logistical nightmares, his forces secured their beachheads and pressed inland. Casablanca fell within 3 days. The Sultan of Morocco, captivated by Patton's military bearing, awarded him the Order of Wissam Alawit, proclaiming in French, "The lions in their dens tremble at his approach." More crucially, Patton had proven that American forces could execute complex amphibious operations and defeat determined opposition. His success earned him promotion to lieutenant general and expanded responsibilities in North Africa. February 1943 brought the first major American defeat at Kasserine Pass, where German forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel shattered the inexperienced Second Corps, inflicting over 6,000 casualties and capturing substantial equipment. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, the Second Corps commander, was exposed as incapable. On March 6, 1943, Patton assumed command. Almost immediately, he transformed the demoralized Corps. Uniforms became mandatory, helmets and full gear always in place, even behind the lines. Rigorous inspections and schedules restored discipline. Patton moved among his men constantly, checking positions, speaking with soldiers, and demanding offensive action even when defending. Within days, the change was visible. Posture straightened, responses sharpened, morale surged. Recognizing the value of complementary leadership, he brought Major General Omar Bradley as his deputy, a steady, methodical foil to Patton's flamboyant aggression. Together, they rebuilt the Second Corps into a fighting force capable of standing toe-to-toe with veteran German units. At El Guitar in late March 1943, American forces held firm and launched a successful counterattack. Patton had proven a simple truth. With discipline, training, and inspired leadership, American soldiers could rival the Wehrmacht. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, elevated Patton to new heights while setting the stage for the crisis that would reshape his destiny. Commanding the 7th Army with 90,000 men landing on Sicily's southern beaches on July 10, 1943, his ostensible task was to protect the left flank of British General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army as it advanced north. But Patton had no intention of playing second fiddle. When Montgomery's advance bogged down near Catania, Patton seized the initiative, launching a lightning campaign westward. Palermo fell on July 22nd in a stunning display of speed and audacity. Then Patton raced his forces east along Sicily's northern coast toward Messina, directly competing with Montgomery. The contest became intensely personal, both generals pushing their men to the limits in a dramatic duel across the island. Patton emerged victorious in Sicily, reaching Messina on August 17, 1943, hours ahead of Montgomery. Militarily, the triumph was debated. Critics argued he had pursued personal glory rather than strategically trapping retreating German forces. Yet, for the world and the American public, Patton's reputation as a bold, relentless commander was cemented. Sicily fell in just 38 days, leaving roughly 24,150 Allied casualties in its wake, knocking Italy out of the war and opening the Mediterranean for Allied shipping. But amid these victories, Patton's brilliance collided with his temperament, creating incidents that would forever shadow his achievements and alter his career. On August 3, 1943, he visited the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia. Walking through the wards, he encountered Private Charles H. Cool, a 26-year-old Hoosier, diagnosed with battle fatigue, no visible wounds, just a mind frayed by combat. Patton, convinced such conditions reflected cowardice, demanded an explanation. When Cool admitted he could not endure the shelling, Patton erupted. He slapped him across the face with his gloves, called him a coward, and ordered him back to the front immediately. Shocked medical staff filed reports, though initially the incident was contained. Only a week later, on August 10th, Patton visited the 93rd Evacuation Hospital and encountered 21-year-old Private Paul G. Bennett, another soldier stricken by battle fatigue. Bennett had served 4 grueling years in combat, but reached his breaking point. When asked what was wrong, Bennett admitted he could not take it. Patton's fury ignited anew. He slapped Bennett twice, once with such force that the soldier's helmet liner flew off. Then, brandishing an ivory-handled revolver, Patton waved it at Bennett's head, threatening to shoot him on the spot. He repeatedly called him a coward, commanding medical personnel either to return Bennett to the front or file charges. Witnesses were horrified. Several submitted detailed reports that ultimately reached Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, who, out of loyalty, locked them away. Other reports, however, made their way through medical channels to the Surgeon General and eventually to General Dwight Eisenhower on August 16th. Eisenhower faced a torturous dilemma. Patton was arguably the Allies' most effective combat general, a man whose audacity and skill were vital for future operations. Yet he had assaulted subordinates, threatened execution, and flagrantly violated both military law and basic decency. The incidents exposed a dangerous flaw, a fiery temper that cast doubt on his suitability for high command. Eisenhower chose a measured but firm response. On August 17th, he sent Patton a scathing letter. While firmness was sometimes necessary, this does not excuse brutality, abuse of the sick, nor exhibition of uncontrollable temper before subordinates. Eisenhower demanded personal apologies to both soldiers, the medical staff who witnessed the incidents, and every division in his army. Patton complied, though the process was humiliating and painful. He visited each division, admitted his errors, and sought understanding. Many soldiers admired his willingness to own his mistakes. Others lost faith. The incidents remained secret until November 21st, 1943, when radio broadcaster Drew Pearson exposed them to the American public. The nation's reaction was explosive and divided. Some hailed Patton as the hard, uncompromising commander war demanded. Others condemned his brutality, questioning his fitness for command. Members of Congress demanded answers, while Secretary of War Henry Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall faced intense pressure to either defend Patton or remove him from command entirely. All of this unfolded as the most consequential command decision of the war loomed, a choice that would involve Patton and two other extraordinary leaders whose careers had taken very different trajectories. One of them, Dwight David Eisenhower, was born October 14, 1890, in Denison, Texas, into a modest family. His father worked as a creamery mechanic, and young Dwight grew up in Abilene, Kansas, far removed from Patton's privileged world. He attended West Point, not out of martial passion, but for a free college education, graduating on June 12, 1915, ranked 61st in a class of 164, the famed class the stars fell on, which would eventually produce 59 generals. In 1915, however, Eisenhower seemed an unlikely hero. Eisenhower's early career brimmed with frustration. When America entered World War I, he craved combat command, but was assigned instead to train tank units at Camp Colt, Pennsylvania. Yet here he excelled, establishing a highly effective tank school that prepared thousands for battle. He never deployed overseas, leaving him feeling as though he had missed the defining experience of his generation. After the war, he reverted to captain, then advanced to major, though progress was painfully slow. In 1919, Eisenhower took part in the Army's transcontinental motor convoy, a grueling 2-month trek that revealed the dire state of American roads. This journey, combined with his tank training, shaped his belief that future wars would demand mobile mechanized forces and solid infrastructure. That same year, he met Major George Patton at Fort Meade, Maryland, where both men served in tank units. Despite their contrasting backgrounds and temperaments, they forged a bond, collaborating for hours on tank tactics, experimental equipment, and articles advocating armored warfare. Their superiors, however, clung to tradition, dismissing their radical ideas. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Eisenhower's career advanced through a series of staff assignments that showcased his extraordinary organizational talents, yet kept him far from combat. He graduated first in his class of 275 officers at the Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth in 1926, earning the attention of senior officers who prized strategic thinking. Later, he served as aide and speechwriter to the aging General Pershing, assisting with his memoirs, a role that honed his skills in planning, diplomacy, and administration. Even as he remained distant from the battlefield he longed to command. Eisenhower's growth as a leader was shaped early by mentors and challenging assignments that honed his mind for coalition warfare. While serving under Brigadier General Fox Connor in Panama, Eisenhower absorbed lessons in military history, strategy, and the complexities of working alongside allies. Connor warned him that another world war was inevitable and that America would almost certainly fight as part of a coalition, likely alongside Britain and France. These ideas lodged in Eisenhower's mind, laying the foundation for the diplomatic and organizational brilliance he would later display. In 1933, Eisenhower became an aide to General Douglas MacArthur, the Army Chief of Staff. The relationship was tense. MacArthur, brilliant but imperious, was convinced of his own genius, while Eisenhower, modest, practical, and patient often, had to smooth over the general's conflicts with Congress and the Roosevelt administration. When MacArthur departed for the Philippines in 1935 to build the nation's defense forces, Eisenhower accompanied him as an assistant. The 6 years in Manila, from 1935 to 1939, were professionally frustrating, but invaluable. Eisenhower learned diplomacy, managing the delicate interplay between American advisors, Filipino politicians, and MacArthur's colossal ego. He discovered that military operations required political support, that coalition warfare demanded compromise, and that patience and tact often achieved more than direct confrontation. By the time he returned to the United States in 1939, war had already engulfed Europe. Eisenhower's career accelerated rapidly as the Army scrambled to expand and mobilize. His exceptional organizational skills, clarity of thought, and tireless work ethic yet drew immediate attention. In 1941, he participated in large-scale exercises in Louisiana, demonstrating the Army's emergent mechanized capabilities. His performance impressed General George C. Marshall, who was assembling a network of talented officers to manage the coming global conflict. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, changed everything. Marshall summoned Eisenhower to Washington and assigned him to the War Plans Division, tasking him with crafting a strategy for the Pacific Theater. Eisenhower threw himself into the work, often sleeping in his office, producing plans that were both practical and visionary. By February 1942, Marshall promoted him to head the War Plans Division, placing him in charge of strategic planning across all theaters. Eisenhower championed a Europe-first strategy, arguing that Germany posed the gravest threat and must be defeated before the Allies could fully focus on Japan. His ability to see the big picture while managing countless details made him indispensable. In June 1942, Marshall sent Eisenhower to London as commanding general of the European Theater of Operations, an extraordinary promotion for a man who had never led troops in battle. Yet Marshall recognized Eisenhower's unique talent for coalition warfare. His mission: establish American forces in Britain, maintain alliance cohesion, and prepare for the eventual invasion of France. Eisenhower excelled. He built trust with Winston Churchill, earned the respect of British military leaders, and created an integrated Allied headquarters where American and British officers worked side by side. His blend of diplomacy, strategic compromise, and firm leadership made him remarkably effective. When Operation Torch launched in November 1942, Eisenhower was chosen as Supreme Allied Commander despite lacking combat experience. Torch was politically delicate, requiring coordination with French forces of uncertain loyalty, while managing American and British commands with divergent priorities. Eisenhower navigated the challenges with aplomb, negotiating ceasefires with French commanders, handling the volatile situation surrounding Admiral François Darlan, and keeping Allied forces focused on defeating the Germans. The campaign succeeded, cementing his reputation as a master of coalition command, even if he never personally led soldiers in battle. The third key figure in the coming command decision was General George Catlett Marshall. Born December 31, 1880, in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, Marshall hailed from a family with Confederate sympathies. His father had been a Virginia businessman before relocating north. Young George attended the Virginia Military Institute, graduating in 1901 as first captain of the Corps of Cadets. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry, he spent the next 15 years in assignments that quietly prepared him for high command, though few recognized his extraordinary abilities. Marshall's first major opportunity came during World War I, serving as a staff officer with the 1st Infantry Division in France. His talents in planning and logistics became evident, particularly in organizing the movement of vast forces during complex operations. At Cantigny, in May 1918, the first major American offensive, Marshall's meticulous preparation contributed directly to success. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive, he coordinated over 600,000 troops and 2,700 artillery pieces in one of history's largest military maneuvers. General Pershing noticed, keeping Marshall close as operations officer and entrusting him with responsibilities far beyond his rank. After the war, Marshall spent 2 decades in roles that strengthened his reputation within the Army, but kept him unknown to the public. He served as Pershing's aide, taught at Fort Benning's infantry school, and held staff positions that showcased his organizational genius. He maintained a small black notebook listing promising officers, a list that would later provide leaders for World War II, including Omar Bradley, Matthew Ridgway, Joseph Stilwell, and Dwight Eisenhower. In 1939, President Franklin Roosevelt made the extraordinary decision to promote Marshall over dozens of senior officers, appointing him Army Chief of Staff. Roosevelt recognized that the coming conflict would demand not just battlefield brilliance, but an organizer capable of managing Congress, orchestrating massive military expansion, and coordinating with allies. Marshall assumed office on September 1, 1939, the very day Germany invaded Poland. The timing was providential. America's army then numbered only about 174,000 men, ranking 17th globally, smaller than Belgium's force, poorly equipped, inadequately trained, and organized for a war that no longer existed. Over the next 6 years, George Marshall transformed the American military with a combination of political savvy, organizational brilliance, and iron determination. He became the unseen hand shaping the Army's expansion, securing massive appropriations from Congress for men, equipment, and training. He founded new training centers across the country, created fresh divisions, and oversaw the induction and preparation of millions of soldiers. Talent, not seniority, dictated promotion. The right officers were placed in the right positions, sometimes bypassing tradition entirely. He coordinated with the Navy despite fierce inter-service rivalries and navigated the often difficult personalities of Allied leaders, especially Winston Churchill, whose strategic instincts frequently clashed with American priorities. Above all, Marshall became the relentless advocate for a cross-channel invasion of France. From 1942 onward, he argued that striking directly at German-occupied France was the fastest route to victory. Churchill, ever cautious, favored a peripheral approach: North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and the Balkans, the so-called soft underbelly of Europe. Marshall countered that this strategy diluted resources and would prolong the war. He battled within his own military, contending with Navy leaders demanding more attention to the Pacific, and with British planners haunted by the slaughter of World War I, fearful of repeating past mistakes on the Western Front. His persistence paid off. By 1943, Roosevelt had committed to Operation Overlord, set for May 1944. Having conceived, championed, and secured approval for Overlord, Marshall seemed the obvious choice to command it. He was the most respected American military leader. Churchill called him the organizer of Allied victory. Stalin trusted him. Roosevelt relied on him absolutely. Even Pershing, now in his 80s, urged his appointment. Military historians and members of Congress alike assumed he would lead the invasion. Yet Marshall never sought the position. When asked his preference, he repeatedly answered that the decision belonged to the president. Personal ambition could not outweigh the needs of the nation. Roosevelt, however, faced a tormenting dilemma. Marshall deserved command, his strategic vision and organizational mastery unmatched. But his value in Washington was irreplaceable. From the Capitol, he coordinated the global war effort across multiple theaters, managed Congress to ensure funding, worked with the British and Navy, and handled strong-willed figures like MacArthur in the Pacific. Removing him could jeopardize the industrial mobilization that supplied weapons and ammunition to every front. Admirals Ernest King and William Leahy insisted that no other officer could replicate Marshall's indispensable role in Washington. The decisive moment came during the conferences in Cairo and Tehran in December 1943. Stalin pressed to know who would lead Overlord, suspicious of Anglo-American delays and anxious for a concrete timeline. Churchill privately supported Marshall, but fretted over losing his exceptional coalition manager. Roosevelt wrestled with the choice, torn between rewarding Marshall and preserving his irreplaceable presence in Washington. In early December, Roosevelt sent Harry Hopkins to Cairo to gauge Marshall's preference. Marshall refused to state one, insisting he would fully support whatever decision the president made. On December 5th, Roosevelt invited Marshall to a private meeting. After some hedging, Roosevelt asked plainly what Marshall wanted. As always, Marshall demurred, stressing duty over personal desire. The president reportedly replied, "I feel I could not sleep at night with you out of the country." The decision was made. Marshall would remain in Washington, orchestrating the global war. Someone else would lead Overlord. On December 7th, 1943, exactly 2 years after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt informed Eisenhower of his appointment. The message was brief and informal. "Well, Ike, you are going to command Overlord." Eisenhower was stunned. He had assumed Marshall would lead and had been preparing to return to Washington as Chief of Staff. Now he faced the single greatest military responsibility in history. That same day, Marshall sent a note to Stalin and Churchill announcing Eisenhower's appointment and included a copy for Eisenhower himself, with a simple handwritten message. "Dear Eisenhower, I thought you might like to have this as a memento." History had chosen its generals. Patton, Eisenhower, and Marshall, three men of vastly different temperaments, talents, and paths, would converge in a moment that would define the war and shape the modern understanding of command. The decision had been made, the signature still wet, and yet its brilliance only became clear once its logic was fully grasped. Overlord was not primarily a test of battlefield genius. It was the most complex organizational challenge in military history, a web of coordination spanning multiple nations, each with its own command structures, strategic priorities, and tactical doctrines. Over 3 million men would be involved, supported by nearly 7,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and countless logistical elements. Success would hinge not on daring maneuvers alone, but on diplomatic skill, organizational mastery, strategic foresight, and the ability to make disparate allies function as one. Eisenhower possessed exactly those qualities. His natural charisma made him universally respected and trusted. British troops had faith in him. Churchill respected him despite occasional disagreements. Even Charles de Gaulle, notoriously difficult and suspicious of Anglo-American intentions, found him acceptable. Eisenhower's strategic vision encompassed more than military operations. It accounted for political consequences, economic factors, civil affairs, and public opinion. He understood that modern war was as much political as it was military. North Africa and Sicily had proven that he could manage complex coalitions under combat conditions. Crucially, he had cultivated a leadership style that balanced authority with genuine regard for subordinates. He listened to criticism, admitted mistakes, and learned continuously qualities essential for commanding a multinational coalition where unity of effort mattered more than individual brilliance. By January 1944, as Eisenhower established his headquarters in London, the challenges validating Roosevelt's choice appeared almost immediately. The first was the command structure. The initial assault plan, developed by British Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan, called for a 3-division landing on a narrow front. Eisenhower recognized its vulnerability at once. He expanded it to 5 divisions on a broader front, offering flexibility and reducing the risk of a German counterattack. Achieving this required more landing craft, additional air support, and a vast increase in supplies, all scarce. Eisenhower negotiated tirelessly with Churchill, the combined chiefs of staff and naval commanders. His diplomacy and persuasiveness secured the necessary resources, proving his mastery of coalition leadership. The second challenge involved ground commanders. British General Bernard Montgomery would command all initial assault forces, including American and British armies. While this arrangement satisfied the British, some American generals viewed Montgomery as overly cautious and arrogant. Eisenhower handled the tension with clarity and finesse. Montgomery retained operational control during the landings, but authority would shift to American commanders once the breakout occurred. By delineating responsibilities and managing Montgomery's personality, Eisenhower maintained cohesion across the coalition. The third and perhaps most delicate challenge was Patton. Controversy, slapping incidents, and public outcry could not diminish his combat skill. Both Eisenhower and Marshall recognized that Patton's aggressive brilliance would be decisive once mobile warfare began. Eisenhower's solution was a masterstroke of strategic creativity. Patton would command Third Army, to be activated only after the invasion succeeded and a breakout occurred. Until that moment, he would serve as the centerpiece of the most elaborate deception operation in military history, Operation Fortitude. The goal of Fortitude was simple in concept, but devilishly complex in execution. Convince German intelligence that the main invasion would strike Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, the obvious choice, while the Allies actually landed in Normandy, where the beaches were more favorable and maneuvering room abundant. But the deception had to endure even after the Normandy landings began. It required creating a fictional army, the Phantom Force known as the First United States Army Group, or FUSAG. FUSAG existed only on paper, in fake radio traffic, dummy equipment around Dover and southeastern England, and reports from German spies who were, in fact, British double agents. FUSAG needed a commander whose reputation would lend credibility to the ruse. There was only one choice. Despite controversy, Patton's notoriety in German intelligence as the most dangerous Allied commander made him ideal. In early 1944, he became the apparent leader of FUSAG, a general of legend who would draw enemy attention away from the true target. The man once sidelined for his temperament had become the keystone of one of the greatest strategic deceptions in history, a proof that, in war, brilliance could be wielded both openly on the battlefield and invisibly in the mind of the enemy. The Germans fell completely for the ruse. Their intelligence services, the Abwehr, and the SD poured immense resources into tracking FUSAG. They photographed dummy landing craft made of scaffolding and canvas, intercepted radio transmissions from mobile units, simulating 11 fictitious divisions, and received reports from agents who were, in fact, British double agents. Most convincingly, they observed Patton himself touring installations, giving speeches, and meeting with subordinate commanders. Every piece of intelligence confirmed the same story. Patton commanded a massive force preparing to strike Calais. The Germans believed it because it made sense. Calais offered the shortest crossing, just 20 miles, compared to Normandy's 100 and the most direct route to Germany's industrial heart, the Ruhr. Most importantly, Patton was the Allies' best tactical commander. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt later remarked that Patton was your best, while Rommel had studied his tactics in North Africa. Hitler reportedly called him that crazy cowboy general. In the German mind, it followed naturally. The Allies would use their finest general for the decisive assault, not a secondary operation. Wherever Patton was, there the main invasion would occur. The deception included a particularly audacious touch. General Hans Kramer, a former panzer commander captured in North Africa in May 1943, was being repatriated for health reasons in May 1944. British intelligence arranged a dinner with Patton, presented as FUSAG's commander. Throughout the evening, Patton casually referenced Calais and invasion preparations. Afterward, Kramer was driven through southern England, ostensibly seeing FUSAG near Dover, though he was actually in southwestern England observing real overlord preparations. By the time he reached neutral Sweden, Kramer confirmed everything the Germans already believed. Patton commanded a massive force preparing to invade Calais. While Patton played the decoy, Eisenhower labored endlessly preparing the real invasion. He moved his operational headquarters to Telegraph Cottage outside London, where he could focus without constant interruptions. He personally visited every division scheduled to participate in the assault, speaking to soldiers, projecting confidence, and building trust. By June 1944, he had visited all American, British, and Canadian assault units, often spending hours with men who would carry out his orders. Soldiers responded to his genuine warmth and obvious concern for their welfare. They saw not a distant commander, but a leader who understood what he was asking them to do. Eisenhower also made the hardest decisions a commander faces. He approved the airborne assault despite predictions of up to 70% casualties for paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines. He understood the risk, but knew that without airborne forces securing the invasion flanks, the entire operation could fail. He wrestled with weather. D-Day had been scheduled for June 5th, but storms forced a postponement. Meteorologists predicted a brief improvement on June 6th, after which more bad weather would return. A delay beyond June 6 would compromise security and give the Germans precious time to strengthen defenses. Eisenhower made the fateful call, go on June 6. He later described it as the loneliest decision of his life. On the evening of June 5th, as troops loaded onto ships and aircraft prepared for takeoff, Eisenhower visited the 101st Airborne Division at their airfield near Newbury. These paratroopers would drop into Normandy hours before dawn to secure bridges and road junctions, facing expectedly severe casualties. Eisenhower walked among them, speaking quietly, joking about fishing, asking about their hometowns. A photographer captured an iconic image, Eisenhower talking with Lieutenant Wallace Strobel, whose face reflected the tension felt by all soldiers. Afterward, Eisenhower returned to headquarters and drafted a message taking full responsibility should the invasion fail. He carried it in his pocket, ready to release it if necessary. It read in part, "Our landings have failed, and I have withdrawn the troops. The decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, air and navy, did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame attaches to this attempt, it is mine alone." Dawn broke on June 6, 1944, with clearing skies over the English Channel. At 6:30 a.m., American, British, and Canadian soldiers stormed 5 beaches across 50 miles of Normandy coastline. Nearly 7,000 vessels, from warships to landing craft, supported the assault, with over 11,000 aircraft providing air cover. By day's end, approximately 156,000 Allied soldiers had landed. Casualties totaled around 10,000, with Omaha Beach seeing the heaviest losses, where fierce German resistance nearly pushed attackers back into the sea. Yet the invasion succeeded. By midnight, Allied forces held their beachheads. The liberation of Western Europe had begun. Eisenhower's meticulous planning, coalition diplomacy, and leadership had produced triumph. The expanded assault front prevented German forces from concentrating on a single point. The airborne drops, despite heavy casualties and widely scattered deployments, sowed confusion among German commanders and delayed reinforcements. Naval gunfire offered critical support to struggling infantry, while Allied air superiority kept German aircraft from attacking vulnerable troops and ships. Most importantly, the deception worked flawlessly. As the fierce fighting raged across Normandy, Hitler refused to commit his armored reserves, convinced the real invasion would still come at Calais. The German 15th Army remained near Calais, waiting for Patton. For 7 weeks after D-Day, substantial German forces stayed at Calais instead of reinforcing Normandy. British double agents, particularly Juan Pujol, Garcia, codenamed Garbo, continued sending messages through German intelligence networks describing Fusagi's preparations and explaining why the supposed Calais invasion had been delayed. Hitler believed every word. Armored divisions that might have crushed the Normandy beachhead were kept idle, waiting for an attack that would never come. Allied planners had hoped the deception might buy 2 weeks. It bought them 7. Every German division tied to Calais was one fewer at Normandy, a strategic advantage worth dozens of tactical victories? Patton learned of the Normandy invasion like everyone else by listening to the BBC on the morning of June 6th. He was devastated. Though he understood his role in the deception and his importance to the plan, he felt he was missing the greatest military operation in history. He wrote to his wife Beatrice, "It is hell to be on the sidelines and see all the glory eluding me, but I guess there will be enough for all." To his son George at West Point he wrote, "This group of unconquerable heroes whom I command are not in yet, but we will be soon. I wish I was there now, as it is a lovely sunny day for a battle, and I am fed up with just sitting." Yet Patton's absence was his greatest contribution. His reputation alone, as phantom commander of a fictional army, tied down German reserves and convinced Hitler that Normandy was a diversion. History's greatest irony. Patton achieved his most strategically significant victory while playing no active role on the battlefield. His mere presence in intelligence reports, leveraged brilliantly by Allied planners and Eisenhower's vision, accomplished more than any tactical maneuver could have. On August 1st, 1944, after 2 months of brutal fighting in Normandy, Patton's Third Army officially became operational. The moment he had waited for had arrived. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, had finally shattered German defensive lines west of St. Lo. Through that breach poured Patton's armored divisions in a campaign of speed and aggression that stunned the German High Command. His decades of tactical experience were on full display. His forces moved faster than the Germans thought possible, appearing in unexpected locations and surrounding enemy units before they could react. Third Army's advance across France became legendary. Patton's divisions swept west into Brittany, then wheeled east toward Paris, and finally turned northeast toward the German border. By August 25th, American troops were entering Paris. By month's end, Third Army had liberated most of Brittany, closed the Falaise Gap, trapping German forces, and captured countless towns and thousands of prisoners. The pace was breathtaking. Patton's forces advanced so rapidly that airborne units complained he overran their designated drop zones. In 30 days, Third Army covered ground planners had estimated would take 6 months. The advance finally paused at the end of August when supply lines could no longer keep up. Gasoline consumption far exceeded delivery capacity. Eisenhower faced a strategic choice: concentrate all fuel and supplies on Patton, allowing Third Army to drive deep into Germany, or distribute resources across a broad front, permitting all Allied armies to advance steadily but preventing any single deep penetration. Eisenhower chose the broad front strategy, believing it safer and more likely to achieve lasting success. Patton was furious, convinced he could have reached Berlin by Christmas if supplied. The debate over broad versus narrow thrust would continue for decades, but Eisenhower's decision reflected his responsibility for the entire campaign, not just one army's glory. In December 1944, Eisenhower's judgment faced its sternest test. Germany launched its final major offensive, secretly amassing forces for a massive attack through the Ardennes forest, gambling everything to split the Allied armies and recapture the port of Antwerp. On December 16th, 3 German armies struck thinly held American lines. The attack, later called the Battle of the Bulge, created a crisis demanding Eisenhower's finest performance as Supreme Commander. Within hours, Eisenhower coordinated the Allied response. He immediately recognized that, while dangerous, the German attack presented opportunities if managed correctly. The enemy was advancing beyond its supply lines, exposing itself to counterattack. Eisenhower rushed reinforcements to threatened sectors, gave ground where necessary to preserve forces, and orchestrated American, British, and French units to contain the penetration. Most crucially, he turned to Patton with an assignment that seemed impossible. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded at Bastogne, a vital crossroads. If it fell, German forces could push west toward Antwerp. Eisenhower needed Patton to disengage from current operations, pivot Third Army 90 degrees north, and strike the southern shoulder of the German Bulge to relieve Bastogne. On December 19th, Eisenhower met with Patton and Omar Bradley at Verdun to coordinate the response. When asked when he could attack, Patton said December 22nd. Eisenhower, skeptical that an entire army could redeploy so quickly, called the estimate fatuous. Patton was not exaggerating. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, had predicted the German offensive through careful analysis of enemy movements. Patton had already directed his staff to prepare contingency plans. When he returned to headquarters in Nancy, he simply called his chief of staff and gave the code word for the operation they had rehearsed. What followed was one of the fastest and most complex maneuvers in military history. On December 26th, Third Army launched its northward drive through blizzards and frozen ground toward Bastogne. Despite brutal weather, stubborn German resistance, and daunting supply challenges, Patton's forces pressed forward without hesitation. By December 26, elements of the 4th Armored Division had broken through to Bastogne, linking with the surrounded paratroopers. Reinforcements followed swiftly. By the end of January, Allied forces had pushed German troops back to their original lines. The Bulge had been eliminated. Germany's last major gamble had failed. The Battle of the Bulge became a striking testament to the complementary genius of Eisenhower and Patton. Eisenhower's strategic coordination orchestrated the global response, allocated resources, and made crucial high-level decisions, while Patton provided the audacious, decisive tactical leadership that turned plans into battlefield reality. Together, they were an unbeatable team, each indispensable to victory. By March 1945, Allied forces were crossing the Rhine and driving deep into Germany. On March 1st, Third Army captured Trier, prompting a legendary exchange. When Eisenhower's headquarters suggested bypassing the city to save divisions, Patton replied with characteristic bravado, "Have taken Trier with 2 divisions. Do you want me to give it back?" The message encapsulated Patton's aggressive confidence and his determination to achieve objectives others deemed impossible. From March through May, Third Army raced across Germany. They liberated Ohrdruf, the first concentration camp freed by American forces, forcing local civilians to witness the horrors inflicted by the Nazis. Patton's units captured thousands of prisoners linked with Soviet forces advancing from the east and penetrated deep into Czechoslovakia before orders finally halted the advance. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Third Army's combat record was extraordinary. From August 1, 1944 to May 8, 1945, Patton's forces had liberated or conquered roughly 81,500 square miles across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. They had taken approximately 1.28 million prisoners and inflicted an estimated 500,000 casualties on German forces. Third Army's own losses, though significant, were proportionally lower than many other Allied units, validating Patton's philosophy that relentless offensive action saved lives by preventing the enemy from organizing effective resistance. Yet it was Eisenhower's leadership that made all of this possible. His organizational mastery had planned and executed overlord. His diplomatic skill had kept a fractious coalition together through endless crises. His strategic vision guided operations from Normandy to the Elbe River. His ability to manage difficult personalities, from Montgomery's arrogance to de Gaulle's prickliness to Patton's impulsiveness, prevented conflicts that might have crippled the Allied effort. His courage to make hard decisions, from approving high-risk airborne operations to choosing invasion timing, proved him the ideal supreme commander. The question of why America's finest combat general had been sidelined from leading D-Day was answered through the operation's very nature. Overlord did not require a battlefield tactician. It demanded a coordinator, a diplomat, a strategic thinker, capable of managing the most complex military operation in history. Patton was America's greatest tactical commander, perhaps the war's most feared and effective field general. But Overlord required different qualities: the ability to orchestrate coalition warfare, balance competing national interests, think strategically across continents, and maintain trust among multiple governments and services. Eisenhower possessed these qualities in abundance. Patton did not. The slapping incidents, far from minor missteps, revealed traits that disqualified Patton from supreme command. His temper, impulsiveness, and lack of political acumen might be tolerable at the corps or army level, but were untenable when managing a multinational coalition and sustaining political support. Roosevelt's choice of Eisenhower over Marshall demonstrated even greater wisdom. Marshall, an organizational genius with unmatched strategic vision, would have been an extraordinary supreme commander. But his irreplaceable value lay in Washington, where he coordinated the global war effort, managed Congress, balanced multiple theaters, and maintained the logistical and political infrastructure that made victory possible. The combination of Eisenhower in Europe and Marshall in Washington proved optimal, with Patton fulfilling his ideal role. His tactical brilliance and aggressive spirit were exactly what mobile warfare required once the invasion succeeded. Third Army's performance validated every claim about his abilities. Patton was indeed the general whose name struck fear into German hearts, yet he operated within a larger plan conceived by minds attuned to the full scope of global strategy. The legacy of these command decisions extended far beyond World War II. Eisenhower's success established new principles of modern military leadership. Contemporary warfare requires not only tactical brilliance, but also organizational excellence, political awareness, diplomatic skill, and strategic vision. These standards became central to U.S. military doctrine in subsequent decades, emphasizing joint operations, coalition warfare, and the coordination of resources across theaters. Eisenhower's reputation propelled him into political leadership, and as president from 1953 to 1961, he applied the same qualities: organization, strategic thinking, coalition building, and navigating complex situations without losing sight of overarching objectives. He ended the Korean War, managed Cold War tensions without nuclear escalation, and established policies guiding American strategy for generations. Eisenhower's presidency demonstrated that the skills required for supreme military command translated effectively to supreme civilian leadership. Patton, by contrast, never had that opportunity. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, he became military governor of Bavaria. Within months, controversy erupted. His reluctance to pursue aggressive denazification, his statements suggesting former Nazi Party members could serve in administrative roles, and his proposals that the Allies should immediately confront the Soviet Union brought sharp criticism from Washington and the press. Sensitive to political pressures, Eisenhower removed Patton from Third Army Command in October 1945. On December 8, 1945, Patton was severely injured in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany. His staff car collided with an American truck, leaving him with a broken neck and paralysis from the neck down. He was transported to Heidelberg Hospital, where doctors were unable to reverse the damage. 12 days later, on December 21, 1945, Patton died from pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure. He was 60 years old. He was buried in the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg among the soldiers he had commanded, his grave marked with a simple white cross identical to those of the men under his leadership, a fitting tribute to a general who had always led from the front. Marshall, meanwhile, continued in public service, assuming roles of extraordinary responsibility. In 1945, President Truman appointed him special envoy to China to mediate between nationalists and communists. The mission failed, but Marshall gained insights into Asian affairs that shaped American policy for years. In 1947, Truman named him Secretary of State. In that role, Marshall proposed the European Recovery Program in a speech at Harvard University on June 5, 1947. Quickly dubbed the Marshall Plan, it provided massive American aid to rebuild Western Europe's war-torn economy. Over 4 years, the United States delivered more than $12 billion to help 16 European nations recover. The plan prevented economic collapse, created prosperity that undercut communist appeal, and cemented American leadership in the post-war world. In essence, the Marshall Plan was as important to winning the peace as Overlord had been to winning the war. Marshall served briefly as Secretary of Defense during the Korean War before retiring in 1951. In 1953, he received the Nobel Peace Prize, becoming the only professional soldier ever honored in this way. He died on October 16, 1959, at age 78, at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. President Truman attended, later calling Marshall the greatest living American. The intertwined legacies of Eisenhower, Marshall, and Patton defined Allied victory in World War II. Each contributed essential elements that complemented the others. Marshall provided strategic vision and global coordination from Washington. Eisenhower delivered organizational execution and coalition management in Europe. Patton provided tactical excellence and the offensive capability to exploit breakthroughs on the battlefield. No single individual could have achieved victory alone. Together, with each operating in the sphere where his talents were most effective, they formed an unbeatable combination. Roosevelt's wisdom in assigning roles was decisive. The choice to sideline America's most feared combat general from leading D-Day was vindicated by results. Overlord succeeded through flawless organizational execution, not tactical brilliance. The invasion required coordinating millions of details across multiple services and nations. It required diplomatic skill to manage coalition tensions, strategic vision to integrate operations into the broader war effort, patience to wait for optimal conditions, and courage to act when conditions were merely adequate qualities Eisenhower embodied. Patton's strengths emerged later in mobile warfare enabled by the breakout from Normandy, where his aggressive tactics determined outcomes. Using Patton as a deception before D-Day and as a combat commander afterward demonstrated a perfect understanding of how to employ each general where his abilities had maximum impact. The mathematics of Allied victory were calculated not in who was the best fighter, but who was the best coordinator, not who could win battles, but who could manage the complex enterprise of coalition warfare, not who struck fear into enemy hearts, but who maintained trust among fractious allies. By these measures, Eisenhower was the only choice for supreme command. Patton was indispensable as a tactical commander. Marshall was indispensable as a strategic coordinator. But for planning and executing D-Day, then managing the campaign from Normandy to Berlin, Eisenhower possessed precisely the right combination of skills. In choosing Eisenhower over both Marshall and Patton, Roosevelt demonstrated the same strategic thinking that characterized his wartime leadership. He understood that military organizations, like all complex human enterprises, require different capabilities at different levels. The qualities that make an outstanding company commander differ from those required at division level. The skills that define an excellent corps commander differ again from those demanded of an army commander, and the qualities essential for supreme command are different still. Roosevelt understood this hierarchy of leadership. He recognized that Operation Overlord required not supreme tactical brilliance, but supreme organizational and diplomatic capability. He chose accordingly. The result was nothing less than the liberation of Western Europe and the defeat of Nazi Germany. On June 6, 1944, when Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, they did so under a command structure that perfectly matched capabilities to requirements. Eisenhower's organizational mastery had planned every detail of the invasion. His diplomatic finesse had maintained coalition unity among often fractious allies. His strategic vision had identified the right time, place, and method for striking the European continent. From Washington, Marshall's steadfast support provided the vast resources and political foundation that made success possible. Meanwhile, Patton, serving as a deception in England, held down German reserves through reputation alone. When Patton finally entered combat 2 months later, his unmatched tactical genius exploited the opportunities Eisenhower's planning had created. The greatest military operation in history succeeded because Roosevelt made the right command decision. America's best combat general was not excluded from D-Day through failure or punishment, but because the operation demanded a different form of excellence. In choosing Eisenhower over Patton for supreme command, Roosevelt recognized an essential truth of modern warfare. Victory depends on matching the right leader to the right challenge. Patton earned his immortal reputation in the breakout across France, in the relief of Bastogne, and in the relentless drive through Germany. But D-Day, the decisive hinge of the war, belonged to Eisenhower. His organizational genius, diplomatic balance, and strategic clarity enabled the 20th century's greatest military achievement. The decision to sideline Patton was not a rejection, but a recognition that supreme command required talents of a different order, talents Eisenhower possessed in exceptional measure. Both men, serving where their unique abilities had maximum effect, contributed indispensably to Allied victory. The wisdom of Roosevelt's choice was proven by the outcome: the liberation of Europe, the destruction of Nazi tyranny, and the establishment of a democratic peace that has endured for 8 decades. That legacy stands as testament to a timeless principle that great leadership is not only about courage or tactical skill, but about the wisdom to place the right person in the right role at the right time. Franklin Roosevelt possessed that wisdom. His decision to entrust Eisenhower with supreme command and to keep Patton where his talents would shine brightest changed the course of military history and helped shape the modern world.